I'd like to welcome President Macky Sall, the President of Senegal, um, and to echo what he said this morning to me when we first met. In a very real sense, he saw this as a pilgrimage because it allowed him to come to the sixth region of Africa. And we know, Your Excellency, that you have been instrumental in ensuring that Africa and its diaspora unites in the common cause of humanity. We've been able to work together on many important issues. But above all else, for our two countries, it is important to know that we face common challenges, but we have a common approach to development. Like Barbados, Senegal has provided free primary to tertiary education for its people. It has invested heavily in healthcare and therefore believes that at the center of development must come its people. Like Barbados, Senegal also recognizes that there is need for structural transformation of the economic structures of our nation, without which we will not be able to prosper and to make the transition into the new, into the 21st century. We have today discussed the fact that both of our countries are water scarce countries, and indeed Senegal has taken a global role with respect to the combating of droughts across the world, and to recognize that without that we are not going to be able to achieve development for our people and indeed to achieve food and nutritional security and sovereignty, which is an ambition of both countries. For most Barbadians, we need to remember that history and language, and to a lesser extent geography, have separated us. But geography ought to unite us because we're neighbors. And Senegal is as much our neighbor as St. Vincent and the Grenadines is, as I indicated. We, against that backdrop, are committed to being able to work together to open the opportunities for tourism and indeed international transport. Senegal is a hub to Africa, not just West Africa, but to Africa, period. And for us, we have always advocated that Barbados is that first landmass after you leave the continent of Africa, and therefore is a natural hub to the Americas and not just the Caribbean community. We discussed also today the possibilities for further cooperation with respect to the Bridgetown Initiative. Barbados takes chairmanship of the V20 countries, of which Senegal is a member, in a few months' time. But more importantly, President Macky Sall has been one of the key advocates, not just for the Bridgetown Initiative, but indeed has been a global leader with respect to the agreements that we reached in Paris in June, the Paris Pact for People and Planet, and we believe that President Sall's voice will continue to be a major dominant voice on this area of the reform of the global financial architecture. There's a lot of fancy words, but it simply means that if countries like ours, like Senegal, like Barbados, those in Africa and the Caribbean, are to be given a fair chance, if we are to lower and level the cost of debt, this is how we are going to do it, by changing the rules of the game. And if we don't change the rules of the game, we will pay 3 and 4 times to borrow what other countries pay. And if we are paying 3 and 4 times to borrow, it means that we are losing opportunities that we can otherwise have to develop for our people. We also discussed cooperation in sports, not only in the sports that we treasure within our own country. In Senegal, they are big on their form of wrestling. In Barbados, we are big on road tennis and cricket. Senegal was the last holder of the African Cup in football, so that you will begin to see that there's a lot that our people can enjoy in cooperating at the people-to-people level in sports and, of course, in culture. I think it is fair to say that anyone who is a lover of culture will know that Senegal stands tall among the global family of nations with respect to creative expression, and in particular for us as a country where 95% of our people derive from Africa, that the concept of negritude and the concept and the philosophy as expressed by Sheikh Anta Diop, who Senegal celebrated the centenary of his birth last month, will allow us to know that the opportunities for cooperation and collaborative action and creativity are huge. In film, in art, indeed, Senegal has one of the most famous biennales globally, and the biennale will be in May of this year. And the president and the people, the government of Senegal have graciously invited 5 Barbadian artists, and in fact, the coordinator of that biennale, who is here with him, Mbeke, has also come to renew bonds because they are Barbadian artists with whom he has worked closely in the past, in particular, namely Rasakiam, who is one of the more famous Barbadian artists. And President, the photograph, the painting that we've given you on behalf of the government and people of Barbados is in fact an expression of Rasakiam. And then, of course, there's cooperation in the area of agriculture and food security. Senegal's primary economic pursuit is in fisheries. Barbados, as you know, has one of the most, the larger and more modern fishing fleets in the Caribbean. But we are at a stage now where we are moving in this year to introduce new legislation for sustainable fisheries and also for the development of mariculture and aquaculture, in other words, fish farming in the ocean and fish farming on land. And we hope, therefore, that we can deepen our cooperation in this critical area of fisheries and fish processing. And in Barbados' own case, because we see ourselves as a logistics hub, as does Senegal, the whole issue of agro-processing is critical so that we don't only, as was done for centuries, export raw commodities, but also seek to add value to them to ensure that more comes back to our people. This captures, in essence, the discussions which our ministers and our 2 governments and His Excellency and myself were able to have for the day. It has been a packed day, and Your Excellency, we know that we asked you to do much today and are still asking you to do much later, but it means, therefore, that we hope to be able to see you and those of your delegation again in Barbados and to welcome you, perhaps in a more leisurely way than you've had today the opportunity to do so. With those few words, I'd like to pass on to His Excellency, President Macky Sall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, ma chère sœur.
Thank you very much,
Mia.
my dear sister.
Merci.
Mia.
Bonjour,
Thank you.
mesdames et messieurs les journalistes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen from the media.
Je suis très ravi
I am
de faire cette
delighted
visite officielle
to be on an official visit
à
to
l'invitation
Barbados at
aimable de ma
the
sœur,
kind invitation
l'honorable
of
Premier
my
ministre
sister,
Mia Mottley.
the Honorable Prime Minister
Thank you
Mia
very
Mottley.
much, Sister Mia, for your kind
Merci
invitation.
beaucoup pour votre aimable invitation et votre chaleureuse hospitalité.
Feel like at home.
Nous nous sentons vraiment chez nous et nous avons bien apprécié le déjeuner qui nous a été offert
Gardons
aujourd'hui.
aussi un excellent
We are
souvenir
also
de ta
keeping
visite à Dakar
a vivid memory
au mois de mars
of your
2022.
visit to Dakar back in March
Je voudrais
2022.
rendre un hommage
I would like
mérité
to pay
à
deserved
ton
tribute
leadership
to your
qui
leadership,
s'inscrit dans la
which
continuité de
is
l'œuvre
in the
de
continuum
vos héros nationaux.
of your
Je veux citer
national
Granley Adams,
heroes work, namely Granley
citer
Adams
également l'artiste
and
mondial Rihanna.
global
J'ai pu apprécier
art
ton
icon
album sur-
Rihanna, whose
car je suis
book
persuadé
I saw earlier.
que ce qui fait la grandeur de
I
la
am
force
convinced
d'un
that
pays,
the strengths,
c'est
the
moins
greatness
la
of a
superficie ou
nation
la puissance économique,
is not so much economic
mais
might
c'est d'abord la
or
vision,
breadth of land,
l'engagement
but
et la
rather the vision,
détermination des
commitment,
femmes et
and
des hommes
determination, resolve
composent
of the women and men
Et je retrouve ces
who make
valeurs
up
chez
that
vous.
nation. And I can say that I have found these values in you,
Chaque fois
Honorable Prime Minister.
que nous nous rencontrons
Every
à
time
l'occasion
we cross
de
paths
conférences internationales,
at international conferences,
vos interventions sont suivies avec beaucoup d'intérêt.
you speak
Vos points de
with
vue sont
a
respectés.
lot of
Je tiens à
command,
faire ce
and your
témoignage ici chez
viewpoints and your opinion
vous. Et la Barbade
are highly
du
regarded.
Premier ministre
And I would like to testify before your country to that fact. Barbadians, you have a global leader here. I insisted to be here to say as much. I know how much committed you are in the fight against global warming and in the fight against the stagnation of the major institutions, and we are fighting together to bring about positive changes in the UN reform. You know, the UN Security Council reform, Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and World Bank, climate justice, and the fight for fair, just climate transition. Senegal is equally committed because we currently have 31% of renewable in our energy mix. This is the major effort that developing countries are making in order to preserve our planet. We just want to be supported objectively as we try to have access to sustainable funding so that this energy transition towards net zero carbon is not an extra burden as we strive to develop our nations, the least developed countries. In Senegal, we have recently developed 2 electricity-powered mass transit systems, 1 electric train line carrying 120,000 people a day running on electricity, and a system of rapid transit buses that are also electric buses carrying 300,000 people a day between Dakar and its suburb. And for the first time ever, these will be not only electric buses, but they will be solar-powered, completely decarbonated, which means that we are making the efforts, but these efforts need to be supported in adaptation, because Africa has a program for. When I talk about Africa, I mean the diaspora as well, because as I told you, the diaspora is the 6th region of our continent. And for all developing nations, we need to finance adaptation. And with you, my dear Mayor, we are committed to reforming global governance, in particular under the Bridgetown process that you initiated. Together, we are convinced that the international system inherited from the Second World War is obsolete and can no longer govern the realities of the 21st century. So, everybody needs to muster the courage to take the next step so that we enter a more just world, a global village. And we extensively discussed all of these topics in our bilateral meeting and also in the extended session with our respective delegations. We also just had a very interesting business forum with the Barbadian private sector, and we reviewed opportunities of investment and trade both here in Barbados and back home in Senegal. We have discussed overall on topics of common interest at bilateral level, and we held an economic forum, as I said. And all this is testimony that we have the will to work together in order to build diplomatic and political relations between the two countries in order to facilitate bilateral cooperation and also work on transport systems between Barbados and Senegal, because at the end of the day, we are not that far apart, you know. People tended to travel to Europe before coming here, so you have the feeling that it's a long distance. It's much more convenient and much easier for us to travel from Dakar to here than to some African capital cities, such as Cape Town, where we fly 9 hours. Here we only need 6 hours to get to Bridgetown from Dakar. So all we need to do is make an effort to promote interest among our business people in the industry, cultural industry, the Black Civilization Museum, the Gore Memorial under construction, Gore Island, which is a testimony to history, and the whole array of cultural creation should really stimulate this interest so that on either side of the pond we can have this wish to travel so that we can then develop air transport facilities, and why not have a regular line between Dakar and Bridgetown. This is what I wanted to say. We also discussed expertise in terms of vocational training and needs for skilled labor. Senegal is a nation with a lot of labor in many areas, and we would be willing to work with you in that respect. We are really very happy of our stay here, happy with the generous hospitality extended to us. And in conclusion, I would like to say that we have a common history. We have the same origins. We just were separated in pain by slavery. This is why we should do our utmost together to preserve our collective memory, especially for the respect of our cultural and civilizational values. When you see attempts to falsify history and acts of racism and racial discrimination, you realize that the fight for the affirmation of our cultural and civilizational identity has still a long way to go. And this is why we held in Dakar the first World Black Arts Festival back in 1966. Several years later, we now have a great Black Civilization Museum, and on the 6th of January, I launched the construction of the Gorée Memorial, which is an island some 2 miles off Dakar, where slaves were kept before being shipped to the Americas as part of this heinous traffic. We know that Barbados was about the first stop before they were dispatched elsewhere in the Americas. In conclusion, I expressed to the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, our wish to host Barbadian works of art in the museum and in the memorial. These are the comments I wanted to make at the end of our discussions. Encore une fois, merci beaucoup, ma chère sœur. Merci pour tout.
Thank you very much, my dear brother. I'd like to ask members of the press if they have any questions very quickly, 2 or 3 questions before we leave, or anyone? Thank you. Please identify yourself and we take it from there.
Good afternoon, Sharika Griffith from CBC. Prime Minister, if you could say, what would you say is the most significant thing coming out of your meetings over the past few days?
I think the commitment on both sides to be able to create opportunities for our people, both within the public sector where we share common interests. As I said, water shortages and water scarcity is a major issue in both countries, and by extension, it is hampering our ability to be able to attain food security, food and nutritional security as we would like. Similarly, we have much to learn in the area of biosciences. Barbados is now going to build and expand its pharmaceutical industry. As I indicated, we've been in the pharmaceutical industry since 1888, which most Barbadians don't realize. We talk about Collins Limited without knowing about Carlisle Laboratories. And they expanded significantly in the early 1960s to do 140 fill and finish products here that we take for granted that most Bajans don't know either. Senegal has been a distinguished leader in the developing world in the area of medicine and in laboratory work. The Pasteur Institute is a global leader, and we certainly can benefit from the offers that we have for collaboration with them and the Best dos Santos Laboratory and the Living Lab that we are creating now. Similarly, the area of tourism and air services, we today signed a memorandum of understanding on political matters, which lays the framework for cooperation on all of these issues. And we hope that we can sign an air services agreement in the near future, as well as a double taxation agreement and bilateral investment treaty. while we have had diplomatic relations for 48 years, we've had sporadic interaction at the people-to-people level and occasional interaction at the diplomatic level. This signals a desire for us to change the fact that we don't want that kind of sporadic relationship, but we want a continuous one as neighbors. We're neighbors. And if you don't speak to your neighbor, whether in person as family or as a country, then you're undermining the integrity of social relations and solidarity. And we intend to change that. The opportunities for investment, Barbados, as you know, has been a global leader in solar water manufacturing. And the president has indicated, for example, that they still rely extensively on electric heaters in Senegal, and therefore it's an opportunity for Barbadian companies to be able to go into Senegal and work either themselves or through joint ventures to ensure that they can supply in Senegal, which is itself experiencing a construction boom at the moment. So I've raised those few issues, but the truth is that there are a lot more, and culture is a no-brainer. As I said, Senegal is renowned for its contribution in the area of creative arts. The president spoke just now about the 1966 Festival of Black Arts. We ourselves are hoping that over the course of the near future that we will be expanding our creative industries platform even further, and therefore this is an important relationship on which we can build, and the offer to have Barbadian works housed in the Museum of Black Civilization is a major honor for us, and equally for our artists to participate in the Biennale in Dakar in May is another great opportunity for us to express that Barbadians, even though small and come from a small nation, I should say, in terms of land size, that we have been able to produce persons capable of global excellence, not just in the form of Sagari or Rihanna, but indeed among our artists and other expressions of creativity. Any other questions?
Good evening, everyone. Trey Grace from The Nation. It was mentioned that there are about 5 or 6 artists that will be heading to Senegal. Have they already been identified?
I think that the respective institutions are doing that, so I don't want to steal their thunder. I happen to know of who a few are, but I won't want to steal their thunder. Thank you.
Oui, Madame le Premier ministre, vous avez évoqué ensemble les affinités. Oui, vous avez évoqué ensemble les
Discussed also the commonalities between Senegal and Barbados. What importance do you give to the similarities, or what do you have in common?
Thank you very much. As I said, if you look across the developing world, and indeed some parts of the developed world, the commitment to people and the sustainable development goals is perhaps not as ever present as it should be. If it were, the world would have a lot less poverty and a lot less hunger. Our two countries, in spite of our colonial heritage, determined from early as independent nations, and in our own case, even just before independence, that unless we educated our people, we would not create opportunities for them. And unless we gave our people access to health care, that we would not be able to protect them in the way that they should to live the best possible life. I think that that commitment to seeing people and feeling people is critical. The second part, of course, relates to the fact that we both believe that stability is absolutely critical for national development, both political and economic stability. And I'm struck today by how many times President Sall referred to this as a critical part of the development framework. And then, of course, there is the commitment to understanding that as descendants of Africa and as Africans, that unless we celebrate our culture, our philosophy, our history, that we will be dishonoring those who went before us, and we would be disavowing the platform that we have where we continue to contribute to global civilization and global humanity. Our two countries have therefore been thought leaders and have expressed vigorously the views that we have to be able to not only improve our own countries and our own people, but global humanity and civilization. And I think that that therefore gives us a symbiotic bond that allows us to be able now to expand the nature of collaboration and cooperation. In Senegal's case, you have a population of 18 million. We have a population of just under 300,000. But we believe that that synergy that both of us can create, not only on our own behalf, but as hubs to our region, will inure to the benefit of all of our people and ultimately humanity. And most recently, our commitment to fighting the climate crisis and creating fairness in the international community where our countries can be seen and heard. Because when these international institutions were formed, we were still colonies, and we were not taken into account in many of the agreements or many of the structures that were put in place. We have come together to say that that can no longer be the case, and that those of us, particularly in the Global South, believe that if we pool together and work together, as we did after or in the midst rather, of the COVID pandemic, where Africa allowed the Caribbean to join into the Africa Medical Supplies platform so that we could access therapeutics, we could access vaccines in a way that we weren't being able to allow to access it, and most importantly, when we were allowed, at a price that is far better than we could have accessed on our own because of the scale, the benefits of economies of scale. So I think that that captures what the essence of the commonalities are and what potentially some of the opportunities can be. Thank you. One last question. Thank you.
Good evening. Sharia Brathwaite from Barbados today. You spoke a lot about agriculture and food security. So my question is, how soon, in terms of the projects to address the water scarcity, how soon can we expect them to take shape, given that, we have the 25 by 25 initiative around the corner, and we want to make sure that the farmers are fit for purpose?
Well, the 25 by 25 initiative is separate from this per se, because that's next year, and we've been working on that in the region. But our biggest constraint is water scarcity. And the reality is that both countries face it, and we therefore have to be finding novel ways of ensuring that we are not only dependent on the climate in order to be able to provide the irrigation necessary to produce our food. Based on our conversations this morning, I hope that we can expand the level of collaboration to see what are some of the unique opportunities. Senegal, like Barbados, has groundwater, but groundwater is diminishing in Senegal as it is in Barbados. Both of us are having to rely on desalination, not only of salt water, but in our case it's brackish water, so as well with them. So we discussed just now at the very last minute as well, what may be some of the possibilities for joint pooling of procurement in the same way that we did with the Africa Medical Supplies platform, because all of us are buying pipe, all of us are buying fittings, all of us are buying pumps, but we all buy at very high prices because we've not found a way to be able to pool our resources and to have a similar joint procurement platform. This is bigger than just Barbados and Senegal, and we hope, therefore, that we can interest the African Union and CARICOM to be able to recognize that we can be a global powerhouse that shapes markets rather than being a victim of markets and its prices and access. Anything else you want to say?
No, just to add, for the desalination, as an island, I think one of the best way to have fresh water is to make desalination. Of course, the main problem, the main challenge on desalination is the cost of the energy. So developing renewable energy by solar, for example, or wind, will reduce the cost of the water coming from the sea. But we are facing now, we are actually developing in Senegal 100,000 cubic meters per day for desalination, and we launched a new one, all are private. The second is private partnership, and this second is first phase 200,000 cubic meter a day, and we expect in 6 years to go to 400,000. So, because the water in the sea will never finish, so the only thing is we need this technology and the energy. Yeah, and I think we can also work with you on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So this will allow us to put the systems in place that the projects from which the projects can be developed and the investment opportunities. Okay, make sense? Thank you. I want to thank you, and I certainly want to say to all Barbadians that this has been a privilege for the government of Barbados to be able to host you here and to host your delegation, and to be able to say that I hope that this is the beginning of much deeper cooperation. We didn't speak much about the language cooperation and teachers, but we also recognize that our young people, if we can get our young people on both sides to travel, they will lay the foundation that will reverse 4 centuries, regrettably, of separation. Thank you very much, and we wish all of you a very pleasant evening.